Joe talks about Joe. And now, your host, Joe Slepski.
Hello and welcome back to Joe on Joe, the only podcast where we watch every episode of G.I. Joe, Real American Hero, in sequential order and comment on it Mystery Science style. This is an important week this week, not because of a guest, because you got me solo. It's been a while since I've done a solo episode, and I thought that I would take the time this week to get into what we're going to be doing next with the show, and that is the DIC episodes. And the reason I wanted to do it solo is because I don't know much about these episodes. I've watched them. When I was a child, they turned me off, and I stopped watching G.I. Joe. But if you're a regular listener of the show, you know, we refer to it as the quote, the Canadian episodes, and, you know, much maligned and things like that. So I thought that I would take a special episode, just me and you guys. We're going to be watching the first episode of Operation Dragonfire today and go through, really just dig into it, like really break it down. What was it that might have been unappealing to me? What kind of redeeming stuff? Because I want to keep it positive. One of the things that I love about my podcast, frankly, and just in general doing this project is the love and the positivity that has come out for the original episodes. And I want that to continue. I want to keep up that bright light for the DIC stuff. So I'm really going to be looking for a lot of the positive stuff, a lot of the fun stuff, and frankly, educating myself. Here's the thing. There's going to be a lot of, I have no idea what that character is, or I have no idea what that vehicle is, or I have no idea who that person is talking to, because there's a lot of the G.I. Joe characters, if for those of you who aren't familiar, were redesigned heavily going into like 1989, 88, and they look very different on the show, although they might be regulars, people we've already known. A lot of the redesigns that we'll talk about it as they pop up on the show. A lot of the redesigns were part of the classic repaints that G.I. Joe used to do. The toy line, one of the things that they discovered was an easy way to make revenue and not spend a lot of money doing retools on the dies and all the models and the molds and stuff, was to take the existing molds they had and just paint them differently. I'm sure a lot of you guys are aware of this. So you get stuff like the Night Force, the Python Patrol, things like that. So like the Night Force, I'm going to be using yojo.com a lot. So remember to go to yojo.com for any of your G.I. Joe information. And they've got great pictures and great archives of what vehicles are. So I'm using that as a lot of reference to identify some of the vehicles in the show. So I'm looking at the Night Force Night Scrambler. This is from 1989. And the Night Scrambler is just the G.I. Joe APC that they had been making since like 1982, 1983. And it's just the same mold, but repainted black and gray so that it's, quote, Night Force. And they slapped new stickers on it. They saved a lot of money. There's the Night Ray, which is the Cobra hydrofoil with all new molds and different color plastic, and the Night Boomer, which appears to just be the Sky Striker painted black. Same thing, Python Patrol, so on and so forth. So a lot of those characters pop up in these DIC episodes. Specifically in this first one, we've got Slaughter's Marauders, which are fantastic, and they're repainted versions of Footloose, Lowlight, Barbecue, Spirit, Mutt. You know, those are all stalwarts. Those are dudes we totally know. Yet I'm watching this going, I don't know who that guy is. Oh, that's Barbecue. It's just they've completely recolored him. So there's going to be a fair amount of that as we go forward into this next year. Frankly, I'm sure I'll get the hang of it. It's just going to cause me to do a lot more research than I'm used to. I am excited. I'm happy to do it, and we're going to start with a little bit of info about DIC. I've always referred to them as Canadian, and a friend of mine recently, I can't remember if it was on the show or not, but they said, they're not really a Canadian outfit, and you're right. So looking into it, they're an American company. They're located right here in Burbank. But what happened was that they started farming out to Canadian Animation. So DIC technically was originally a French company, and it stands for Diffusion Information Communications, which is just weird. And it started in 1971. I'm getting a lot of this from the Wikipedia. So Wiki, if you're lying to me, how dare you? How dare you, Wiki? And they founded an American branch in 1982. And that's when they started to do cartoons. A lot of the industry people said that DIC actually stood for Do It Cheap, and you could see a little bit of that in this show, which is a real shame. They took a lot of animation over in the mid 80s because they were coming in much cheaper than the traditional some of the other companies that were doing it well, that were spending a lot of time and money to produce the product. They took over G.I. Joe after the G.I. Joe movie. You'll see as we start the show that the theme song changed because it's more of an international direction. The voices all change. They all change. Morgan Lofting, who plays the Baroness, is still there. I can't recognize anyone else, at least on this episode. Destro, I always thought Arthur Burkhart went forward, but it doesn't appear to be, because that's not Arthur Burkhart as Destro. So Morgan Lofting worked with him, and so Baroness is recognizable and and Sergeant Slaughter, of course, because he's Sergeant Slaughter. How can you not have a guy play himself? And that's kind of it for this episode, unless we see otherwise. So they started doing G.I. Joe in 1989, and this is the product, So we're gonna watch it. And we're going to enjoy it. I really hope we're going to enjoy it. So if you're watching along with me, I am using, to my knowledge, the only versions of the cartoons that are out there. They came from Shout Factory a few years ago. They were released, full frame videos. The G.I. Joe Real American Hero Season 2 DVD. Get it from Shout Factory. Tell them Joe and Joe sent you. Now, the difference as it relates to my podcast is they don't insert commercial breaks onto the show. So I may insert some old school commercial breaks into the show just to keep up my format. And I hope you'll follow along and play along. Now, don't forget, as I'm recording this, it's the end of January, and I am running a January review contest. Go to Apple Podcasts and leave me a review, not just a star review, but actually a written review. If you do that, I'm going to pick 5 people out of any reviews that we collected in the month of January. And I'm going to send those random 5 people G.I. Joe comic books from my personal collection. Now, you can leave me a review that's really awesome. You can leave me a review that's really honest, or you can leave me a review that's just outwardly terrible. But either way, the attention helps, and we want to help grow the show and get more people. And one of the reasons I'm doing this, doing these announcements only on the podcast, is because I want to reward my listener. I'm not advertising this on Facebook or Twitter. I'm not sending it out there. I'm only doing it for you listeners who are listening. So if you're hearing this, you have a very good opportunity to just get in there and get some free comic books. I got a big stack of G.I. Joe comic books staring me in the face, and I'm going to be sending them out in February, and I want to send them to you, the weekly listener that's been with me all this time. So please go to Apple Podcasts. Leave me a review. And I know a lot of you guys don't review on Apple. Hey, you know what? If you're listening on, Stitcher or any other podcast, leave me a review there and then shoot me a note. Send me a note to joeandjoepod@gmail.com. I will absolutely count that. I'm sorry if this is the first time I'm saying that this month, but I will totally count that. Wherever you're listening to your podcast, you send me a note that I can go and verify it, and I'll put you in the mix. Because right now, there's going to be a lot of people winning that entered. So please do that. And I love all you listeners, and I love this show, and I love all my guests. And you know what? I love G.I. Joe. So I'm really excited about doing Operation Dragonfire. And remember, on social media, you can find me at Joe and Joe Pod. That's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Send me an email to joeandjoepod@gmail.com. And I'm looking for guest hosts. So if you're out there listening and you just love G.I. Joe, if you love the DIC stuff, if you got a real passion for it, please, please, please send me a note. I want to have you on. I love doing remote guests. I love having guest hosts be fans of the show and fans of G.I. Joe. We want to do it. We're doing it. These episodes will take us pretty much through this whole 2018 year. So it's going to be real exciting. Without further ado, G.I. Joe, Operation Dragonfire, Day 1. Thank you for listening. So here we go. Okay. So brand new opening. This is all very exciting to me. Like I said, a lot of these vehicles I got to get trained up on and see what they are. So we're going to take our time. We got a whole year to make sure everything's knocked out of the way. But there's a Python Patrol Conquest, so that would be a Python Patrol Conquest. That's what they're called. A Python Patrol Stun. I don't see any Python Patrol Asps. Now there's the new Rock and Roll. Behind them was some green shirts. And if you hear in the soundtrack, they've removed all reference of Cobra, and everything's an international terrorist organization. Like they just said, G.I. Joe, International Heroes, etc. It's got a weird fade out. Now, it's written by Doug Booth. Doug Booth's done some good stuff. And I generally like the story here. For me,
we're not dealing with Niagara Falls,
where it breaks down in broad strokes is voice and animation. Some of this animation is...
Let me help you with that. You grab your reading material, little girl. We're ready for a test run.
If some of the animation before, if they used 10 frames a second, I don't exactly know what it is, they used 4 frames here. This is a weird moment.
Only friends call me Scoop. Now get out of my face, because I've got a job to do.
Okay, Scoop is a jerk, all right? We're going to talk about Scoop a lot this episode because he's the main focus. Now, he calls himself Leonard Michaels. Here's a little bit of trivia. Scoop is actually based on a real NBC reporter named Michael Leonard. And they named Scoop after him. I'm sure someone either was a big fan of his work or friends of him.
Child read sound like a federal crime.
That's kind of cool. So he's a real life guy who did really good work apparently, and they named Scoop after him. He got his action figure, the whole thing. So this is low light and rock and roll. By the way, low light with those night vision goggles. When that light went on, should have blinded him.
Cobra prepares to conquer the civilized
And now we get
world.
the new Destro voice. Not great.
Did you hear that,
And check
Cobra
this
Commander?
out.
Luckily, now that
Cobra Commander, still a snake from the movie. I forgot this entirely. So on previous episodes of my show, if I gave misinformation or whatever, I apologize. I am watching this absolutely like in real time with you guys. So there's a lot of this stuff that I don't remember. And these episodes, because I really only saw these episodes once. And that was when they came out.
Not a bloke.
So Cobra Commander's still a snake. We just were introduced to Naugahyde. He's the Dreadnought poacher because Dreadnoughts need a poacher.
the reason for our attack.
And, they've redesigned Serpentor, and they've also given him a new voice. The great Dick Gautier is no longer doing Serpentor, so he's not as epic. He's a little more like, ooh, he kind of sounds like a petulant, like teenager. Which actually makes a lot of sense because when they draw him now, they draw his black hair kind of wisping from the snake cowl. And so it makes him look a little younger doing that. So I'm actually okay with that if I'm not a huge fan of the voice change.
Sweetie, and Distro got tired of seeing its
This is
footprints
huge.
on your sagging face.
Baroness,
So we have...
we can still remain friends.
That's hilarious. So this is the great Morgan Lofting still doing Baroness. So she's a carryover voice that keeps her legit. And Destro just dumped Baroness for Zorana.
Serpentor,
Crazy. And Destro is now in his V2 version. So he's not Pimp Daddy Destro, as we all know and love, but he is Iron Grenadier Destro. So they gave him a gold plate. Now, I remember thinking that I wasn't a big fan of the gold plate Destro because I don't know why, it just didn't ring true to me. But as I've grown older and just seen it more and seen it in action more, I really like it. Like I actually like it quite a bit. It's got a lot of flair to it. He's got a cape and he's got the crazy shoulder pieces and he carries a big sword. But the idea of him switching to like a gold plate to denote a higher status or just a different status, I think is fantastic. So I like this Destro a lot. I'm not a fan of the voice change, but I like the look a lot. I think it works well. Right now, we're seeing what this Operation Dragonfire is actually named after. So in the Himalayas, there's a group of monks that they refer to their Dragonfire weapon. We don't exactly know what it is. In fact, that's the MacGuffin here that Cobra's trying to do. Cobra's trying to get the secret of Dragonfire. They don't know what the secret is. So there's a monk that has infiltrated the monastery. And we're going to learn more about that later.
Now, Rock and Roll also redesigned, and while I really love the original Rock and Roll,
I like this version of it too. There's Spirit. That is, it's Slaughter's Marauders is what it is. So this is Sarge with Slaughter's Marauders and Rock and Roll that's joined them, because Rock and Roll was not a part of Slaughter's Marauders.
Hey, Rock and Roll! Wait for me!
And Scoop jumps on. Now Scoop's real friendly. It's crazy. Scoop is super friendly with everyone else on the team except for Lowlight. And I don't understand what that means.
Not if I've got anything to say about it, bang, bang.
He's like a real serious jerk. Serious jerk to Lowlight. Yeah, I don't get it. But we so on Slaughter's Marauders, there's Barbecue, there's Lowlight. They're driving the Slaughter Marauder vehicles, which was like the Armadillo, the Equalizer, the Lynx. The Lynx is the single cannon, and it was it looks it's kind of like it's got one big cannon in the middle. It's basically a cannon on treads.
I don't know where you learned to drive, but keep up the good work.
Yeah, and so like the animation on the voice, when Rock and Roll's talking, his voice just is not remotely synced up to the way his mouth is moving. The lip flaps, as they call it in animation, the lip flaps just don't work. And that's one of the things that, like, you get that right and the rest of it'll be okay, Everyone's also just a little too cartoony, a little too bubbly, a little too smiley. It's weird. But the backgrounds look great, and the general edge looks good. Like the general aesthetic of the show is good. But it's when you see the characters in action, that's when it breaks down for me. So Barbecue's trying to put a fire out, and Scoop goes running into the fire.
G.I. Joe will return after these messages.
Today's Filecard features on the G.I. Joe Halo Jumper. That's high altitude, low opening, codename Ripcord. His file name is Wallace A. Weems. His primary military specialty is the airborne infantry. His secondary specialty is demolitions. His birthplace is Columbus, Ohio, and he's a grade E4. Ripcord joined the Civil Air Patrol in high school. He discovered skydiving and joined the G.I. Joe team so he could jump from much higher altitudes. He's a qualified expert in the M16, M19 11A1 auto pistol, the Carl Gustav 9mm Parabellum, and the Browning high-power rifle. Quote, let's say you got a trouble spot. You can't sail, walk, or ride in. So you send a plane in so high that it can't be seen or heard. Ripcord jumps and drops like a rock for thousands of feet, then opens his chute at the last possible moment to avoid visual and electronic detection. What he does once he hits the ground, you don't want to hear about. Man, I was a big Ripcord fan. I had the figure, but primarily because he was in the G.I. Joe comic book as a major player. There was like a solid year's worth of comic books where Ripcord was, if not the star of the comic book, and he was the top supporting member. Because his storyline dealt with him falling in love with a girl named Candy, and her dad happened to be a head of the Cobra Crimson Guards, which is a little bit like today's episodes where we got the head of the Cobra Crimson Guards in disguise. And Candy Southern, who her day job was Bongo the Balloon Bear, let's not go any further without shouting that out, she was taken by her father to Cobra Island, so Ripcord flew to Cobra Island in a unapproved mission, got shot down. Zartan swapped places with him. Zartan then infiltrated the pit as Ripcord. Ripcord was pretending then to be Zartan and had to fake his way out with the Dreadnoks, so on and so forth. I loved it. It was such a cool storyline, such a really fun, really great storyline. And they even used him in the movie. He was portrayed by Marlon Wayans, except the change they made was that he wasn't necessarily a Halo jumper. He was just a soldier who wanted to fly airplanes. So they actually changed it, made it more of a pilot instead of a guy that wanted to get out of the plane itself. So I kind of like him as Halo. Also, from the toy perspective, I like that they already had Airborne, which was a skydiver, and then they came out with a guy that did what Airborne did, but just did it a little differently. So it wasn't a repeat of Airborne. Here's a toy that can do a very specific skill, the high altitude, low opening. So I'm a huge fan of Ripcord, and I salute him 100%.
Now, back to G.I. Joe.
Scoop's breaking into this firehouse in order, ostensibly, to break a story. And yet, he doesn't have his camera ready at all. And he's got Sergeant Slaughter pinned under a tank in this fire. Now, he's going to use a piece of wood to lift a tank that is pinning Sergeant Slaughter. That is, like, crazy Herculean strength. Like, that is a tank that was pinning Sergeant Slaughter. I'm just saying. Awkward. That's weird. And he comes and he brings Sergeant Slaughter out.
Barbecue, foam them down.
I don't know why Barbecue wasn't already in there rescuing Sergeant Slaughter, but he did. Either way. So it's the equalizer that Sergeant Slaughter was riding. And then Scoop is he's very upset because his cassette tape, which is a VHS tape, just got destroyed.
You're welcome, Sarge. But I think my footage got a little overexposed.
Yeah, it sure did.
If you feel like changing out those smoking civvies into something more stylish.
Like, say, a G.I. Joe uniform?
Okay.
Michael,
This is...
when I see someone who's got the right stuff, I'll sign them up.
This is great.
Like I said, my friends call me Scoop.
All right. Happy to have you aboard. Yo,
He
Joe.
goes from picking a fight with one of the members to now being welcomed into the team. Although, if you notice, Low Light's not there shaking his hand. And Rock and Roll has a uniform ready to go for him, apparently in his size, designed for his look. There's a Hiss Mark II. I know that. That's right. That's a, Cobra Hiss II. And they just introduced this reporter to the G.I. Joe team. I'm assuming the reporter, A, works for a news outlet. So let's say he works for ABC. So he's embedded there. So he just made the decision to quit his job and join a paramilitary squad. That squad, and this comes into play heavily on the show, hasn't vetted him. They haven't run any background checks on him. They don't know who, they know he fought alongside, I'm sure, but they don't know what he's all about. And that's going to bite him in the butt. Because, as we see here, that's a Crimson Guardman leader that's kind of embedded in with the monks, and he might be a friend of somebody on this show. Oh, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but he's recording over at the monk house. He's recording the chants that the monks are going to use to kind of trigger Dragonfire. So this chanting brings up these magnetized looking pole rods that kind of are sprouting from the ground, and their voice is resonating with these diamonds or these gems, and that's going to create this Dragonfire, which is something that lives in the heart of the mountain. You know what? Honestly, this is no sillier than any other plot that we've seen on G.I. Joe. I gotta be honest. It's no sillier. The thing, if Cobra's goal is to steal it and weaponize it, the thing that I would ask is, they seem to be getting it from the heart of the mountain. So if Cobra wanted to use it, would they have to only live on that mountain? And I guess we'll see. It's a 5-part episode, so we'll see how they plan to utilize it. But for now, it seems like a weird thing to get. But, they're smarter than I am. They got scientists that can clone people, make synthoids. I can't do that. That shot we saw of Serpentor, that's a really good shot of him looking very, very young. Right there, that upward shot, because they give him that thick shock of black hair. And it's funny, I never pictured Serpentor with black hair in my head. I don't know why. So the Joes are celebrating because that dragon made a shield around the Himalayan temple, and it blocked all the Cobra's weapons.
Dragonfire was handed down to us by our ancestors.
Yeah, and
its force lies deep within the earth.
So it's deep within the earth. So maybe Dragonfire actually exists elsewhere. Look at Scoop. spying on his and elsewhere. You know what? Boom. Asked
That
and
fire
answered.
Can make an offensive weapon you wouldn't believe.
There you go. Doug Booth. Good job, Doug Booth. Dragonfire does exist around the world. So if you can access it, you can weaponize it in other places. Awesome. Very smart. I like that. Again, I'm okay with the story that they do here. It's just the rest. The window dressing is a little rough. So Scoop is going to break off from the Joe team and do some reporting on his own.
I'd say we got ourselves a top-flight new G.I. Joe.
This whole episode, by the way, should just be called like the Ballad of Scoop. That's all they do is talk about Scoop and how much they like
There's something
Scoop.
about that Scoop I just don't trust.
Yeah, Lowlight, there is something about Scoop you don't trust because Scoop was a jerk to you for no good reason. Man, he's got a really ornate outfit for a dude that just,
Sorry, Llama, but you gave me a start.
he just was scared by a monk.
Gonna get.
Oh, see, because we know he's a Crimson Guardsman. He pulls off a rubber face mask. Oh, so we never really see his face.
Wait a minute. It's not my old buddy from the Cobra
Okay.
Academy, is it?
Hold on a second. First of all, frightening. This is crazy good. This is crazy good. Scoop's an actual double agent. I love that.
Top-ranking Crimson Guardsman.
Turns out,
G.I. Joe.
yeah,
You know
Leonard
what
Michaels is
recruiters
top-ranking
say,
Crimson
John
Guardsman.
Cobra
This is
see the
shocking.
world.
Very exciting, which is why, of course, they make the episode all about Scoop because they build him up to be this important dude. And they layer in a little distrust with his argument of Lowlight and all that stuff. So I love it. But let's see what we saw
Secret back door into the monastery.
on the Crimson Guardsman. This was hilarious. And I don't know why they had it. Like, maybe it's so that we just never really know what the face of a Crimson Guardsman looked like. By the way, the compact disc looks amazing.
Point this at me.
The Crimson Guardsman couldn't just have his own face, which, by the way, was a person of color. It was an Asian guy because he had to blend in. But then he took off a face mask. He was wearing a fake face
All you
to be
have
a
to do is
monk.
attack, and the secret of
But then they
Dragonfire
never
will be
showed us the
ours.
Crimson Guardsman's real face. And when Scoop saw him pull off his fake face, he didn't recognize him.
G.I. Joe will return after these messages.
Hey, Joe and Joe listeners, you love comic books. You know that I love comic books. If you've listened to the 30 seconds of this show, I'll be talking about comics. Well, I've got a massive comic book collection that I'm actually taking the moment to pare down a little bit. I've got a whole lot of items, mostly comic books, up for sale on eBay, and I would love for you to have a crack at them. So go to eBay and do a search for the user Malone2814. That's Malone 2814. That's going to show you all the items that I have up on eBay. And if you find something that you like, check it out. There's new stuff, there's old stuff, there's hard to find stuff. And listen, when you're checking out, if you send me a note, tell me you're a Joe and Joe listener, guess what you're going to get? Guaranteed free shipping. Boom. That just happened. So head over to eBay today and do a search for user Malone2814. Thanks so much for listening.
Now back to G.I. Joe.
Until the guy covered up his face. So,
My commendation.
does he know the Crimson Guardsman by his mask? Or does he not know what he actually looks like in person? And why couldn't the Crimson Guardsman just be an Asian dude? There's so many questions with the sequence of events that just happened. I don't know, but I love it. I love Scoop being a total double agent.
That particular
Fantastic.
joined Cobra shortly after he was told that G.I. Joe had destroyed his family home.
Okay.
They?
See
Of
this?
course not, we did.
Now, Destro just said that guardsman joined G.I. Joe after being told that joined Cobra after being told that G.I. Joe destroyed his
Rock and roll,
family
you hear
home.
something?
Sounds like footsteps.
We saw
Must have been me.
the episode where the dad got revenge on Cobra for destroying his family home, right? I'm wondering if this Scoop, like maybe he's a cousin to that family because they had young kids, or maybe he grew up in that home. Maybe he's not related to them, but that's the home that he grew up in, and he heard G.I. Joe destroyed it, so he wanted to join Cobra. Because there was a lot of homes destroyed, but I don't really remember it being very specific. Like this guy's house was destroyed, except for and you guys know the episode I'm talking about where it's like the ski chalet, And then the guy goes all Death Wish. The name of the episode, I'm blanking on it right now. But the guy he was an ex-military guy that joined G.I. Joe. So I'm not saying that the ex-military guy is Scoop, but I think Scoop's related to the ex-military guy. Maybe that was their family home growing up. Maybe he's the ex-military guy's brother. And so the ex-military guy, he helped G.I. Joe. But meanwhile, his brother heard, oh, wait a minute, they blew up our house? G.I. Joe did it? I'm going to join Cobra. I like that. That's my headcanon for this episode, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoy that too.
For the last 500 years.
So here we go. The Crimson Guardsman that was posing as the monk, he's filling Destro in on like where all these Dragonfires are around the world. And this is all very standard G.I. Joe. Listen, the musical cues are still very similar, almost the same. They are the same. So that's great. We know we love the music.
Aren't you pleased that Cobra is about to gain the power of the
and
dragon?
we're reminded again that Cobra Commander is still a snake, except
Looks like the commander's gone.
he's not in his little bubble anymore. He escaped his little habitat. Let's talk Naugahyde here for a second here. Here's what's great. So Naugahyde, he's like they took Crocodile Dundee and said, let's make a G.I. Joe out of Crocodile Dundee. Even though they already had Australian dreadnoughts, they're like, we can go even more Australian and make him as Australian as possible. So they give him the hat. He's got the heavy Australian accent. And he's a dreadnought poacher. So, of course, it makes sense to have the dreadnought poacher steal the snake, which is Cobra Commander. I think that's perfect sense. I don't know if they did that much thought into it, but I think it's great.
Without the
I love it.
vibrations of our chanting, Cobra will be unable to raise the Dragonfire.
Yeah.
And without the ancient
So now,
knowledge that lies
this is a
beyond
little,
even our understanding.
we're getting a little plot summary, So basically, the head monk is telling us that they can't use it without the chanting, but we know they already stole the chanting, and so that's what G.I. Joe doesn't know. And so we know what G.I. Joe doesn't know is that Cobra is going to be able to utilize it. They've built their own temple, or they've got access to the temple. Sorry, not built it. They've got access to it, and they're using these tuning forks that look a little bit like the Magnet guy from DC. So not Magneto, but Dr. Polaris. They look a little bit like what Dr. Polaris's helmet looks like.
Looks like we guessed wrong.
And they guessed wrong because Cobra is accessing Dragonfire. They're living in the monk's temple, and the Joes are in trouble.
Deciphered by my computer. These added sound frequencies should change the
Yeah,
defensive
Destro's
Dragonfire
voice just
force
isn't
field
doing
into
it
an
for me.
awesome offensive weapon
I guess I'll get
of
used to it.
irresistible power.
I guess we'll get used to it. But I do like that the Joes are watching this happen and no one's doing anything. They're just staring at it. And we've got like a phoenix-like dragon that is now finally shot at him and blew away an armadillo. And is attacking the Joes. So it's now no longer just a defensive weapon. It has now been weaponized. And Serpentor is he feels pretty victorious. You know what the other thing with these redesigns I just thought of? This is the generation where the G.I. Joe NES video game came out, the second one. So Atlantis. And they used like the rock and roll design was used in that. So that's another place where you may have seen these, at least in animation and stuff. So we get a little bit of preview of what happens on the next episode. That's cool. They got Stalker in his like polar. If you remember, Stalker came with like a canoe, so they're using that in the next episode. Get a lot of just the shots of a lot of these new vehicles. The music's different. Okay, we'll deal with that. Feels different. Doesn't feel as exciting, but it's okay. It feels kind of generic, like generic adventure-y, but it's all right. Yeah. Oh, this is exciting. The art director on this is Chuck Patton. I'm a big Chuck Patton fan. If you know from comic books, he did a really long run on Justice League of America, kind of near the like Detroit era, if memory serves. And he's a real talented dude. Actually, I met him out here a little bit. I'll see if I can try to get him on the show actually to talk about it. As I said, I like the designs of it. I just think they didn't spend enough money on the animation of it. I think that's the real problem. The real problem is it's not the designs, it's not the changes, it's the budget. Everything just doesn't look as good when you compare the two. And I know some of these episodes get a little sillier, but for now, the plot's great too. So, you know what? Listen, I like it. Not a big fan of the changes, but it was still an exciting episode. Joes were out helping somebody. Cobra's still the MacGuffin. The Joes are behind the 8 ball now. They got to figure out how to stop it. That's as G.I. Joe as it gets. So, you know what? I'll give this a passing grade, and I'm excited about doing the rest of them. I hope that you listeners will come along with me. Next week, we should be back with a regularly scheduled guest, and I appreciate you working through the DIC animation with Joe here on Joe on Joe. So now you Joe, and Joeing is half the battle.